Well, everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Development Hell podcast. And it's the movie club back at it again, without Alex, without Matt, but they're here in spirit and hands like this, and ready to talk about Goodfellas. We're getting Scorsese up in here, and this film, if you haven't seen it, is the story of Henry Hill, who was his life in the mob, covering his relationship with his wife Karen Hill and his mobster partners Jimmy Conway and Tommy DeVito. And this was in 1990, nominated for Best Picture. In hindsight, probably should have easily won Best Picture in 1990, but lost to Dances with Wolves, and Godfather Part 3 was also nominated for Best Picture in 1990. So they split the vote? I don't know. There's only so many Italian people in the Academy, I guess. But we have Vinny, we have Joe, we have Jim, and we have Kevin and myself to jump right in to this film based off of the book Wise Guy and adapted by one of the few films that Scorsese completely tackled the screenplay himself. Because I think he knew a thing or two about Italian people and shaving garlic. But Vinny, what are your general thoughts on Goodfellas?
You know what? I know this might be a common thing to say, but this definitely is one of my favorite Scorsese movies. You know what? And like not only is it a great mob drama, but like Scorsese, like he's able to inject humor into it like really well. Like there are certain scenes in it where you're just, like are just hysterical. They're just hysterical, and it's one of those movies where like whenever it's on TV, like I always gotta sit down and watch like at least a half hour, because it's just such an engaging drama. And um, there are other things I'll say about, but I'll save it for later. But yeah, I just like I love it. I love that movie.
Also, Vinny, how many times have you seen this?
I would say, I mean, you know what? I don't watch, like, even if I really like a movie, I don't really watch it like so many times. But I mean, like, Goodfellas I've probably seen like maybe just like through TV and like DVD, like maybe like half a dozen times, maybe a little more.
Okay. That's a lot for Vinny. How about you, Joe? What are your general thoughts?
Okay, so overall, this might surprise a lot of people, but I've only seen Goodfellas three times in my life. The first time was as a kid. It was edited. There was a lot of commercial breaks, so I didn't really remember it that much. The second time was when I was on a very big Scorsese bender, and I was just kind of like watching everything. I mean, at that point, and still to this day, Raging Bull is my favorite movie of all time. Scorsese or not Scorsese, just cinema in general, Raging Bull is my favorite movie. So a part of me wanted to really get to know the filmography. I was studying his earlier career, reading the biographies, and I always hear about Goodfellas, but at the second time watching it with all these other movies I was watching it, I wouldn't really say it was my favorite movie. And I would no pun intended, I need to let it marinate for a bit. But then watching it again in preparation for this podcast, I gotta say it is getting up there. It's not my favorite Scorsese movie, but it is up there for me in a sense of capturing all the essential things and ingredients, the right cast, the right the right popularity for it. I mean, I know we're talking about getting snubbed at the Oscars, but at the same aspect, it has garnered such a cultural admiration. And I'm sure something we're probably going to be talking about, probably like one of the only few movies that actually had actual mobsters, like legit getting mobsters into the movie. So not only talking about the culture like Godfather did, this one legitimately had, wise guys skills, or as what's his name, Joe Pesci would say in the movie.
Well, The Godfather had at least one mobster in it because he was watching it.
Yep.
How about you, Jim?
I think I've seen this movie three times, but that doesn't count all of the clips that I've seen on Instagram or on television. Like growing up, it was always on TV. This movie was constantly on television. But I think I've watched it beginning to end 3 times. It's a lot of fun. I like the humor. I like to quote the Joe Pesci line, "Am I a clown? Do I amuse you?" And
Funny how?
the punny, the punny, the paw, the hoof, the what is it called? That part cracks me up every time. So there's humor, definitely. There's some fucked up relationship drama, which, as I guess, par for the course for Scorsese, right? There's some great slow cam shots paired with music that are iconic now. Yeah, it's hard for me to not watch this movie as a classic already, because it's just always been there, like, around me, you know. And I don't know, am I the only non-Italian person in the chat?
I'm not.
Yeah, looks like it.
Kevin.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Kevin. All right. Ally.
He looks Italian though.
You could pass for Italian.
The best part is, like, the way my screen is set up, the Italians are up at the top and the non-Italians are at the bottom. So it's like you're being watched over by the paisans.
Just some of us are just nondescript ethnicity. There you go. Kevin, how about you?
So this was the first time I ever saw it. It's one of
Really?
those movies I've always wanted to get around to watching, and for some reason or another, I never did. What I really appreciated about it is that they got real down and dirty with the tactics the mob used. It wasn't like watching, Vito Corleone rising to the top of the ranks and all that. They were just essentially just, street level mobsters. That's what I took away the most from the movie, and I really appreciated that. It was a lot of fun to watch all the interpersonal drama they had throughout their lives, and I like how they showed the passage of time in the movie. A lot of time went by, and you saw, like, this guy's kids grow up a little bit. All the drama he had with his wife, I thought, was really interesting. It was a blast.
Yeah, and we got to watch it together. So this is probably the 4th or 5th time I've watched this all the way through. Similar to some other films, including Raging Bull, the first time I watched that I saw Scorsese, I did not like it. I'm just like, this is just a bunch of people yelling the F word at each other. Just like, and to this day, I still hate Henry Hill. And I just hated him as a character, and which was always why I like Casino more, because, like, I actually, like, enjoy and can kind of respect Robert De Niro's character, even though he's not a good one. Henry in this movie is just such an asshole, and even, like, in the mob realm of it all, he's an asshole.
Yeah, he's a
Because,
rat.
he's doing the stuff that he shouldn't be doing.
Yep.
And we'll get into more detail about it. But, like, as I've watched this movie more, it's especially this is the second time that I've watched it in probably the past year and a half, because I did my whole Scorsese dive. And this is now, like, my number 7 Scorsese movie, which that's pretty darn great when he has that many great films. And this film moves so well.
Mm-hmm.
For a 2.5-hour film, it's like, bam, gone. There's so much energy to it. It, like Kevin, what you mentioned, it just moves through time so well. One moment you see little Henry popping his cherry, getting arrested for the first time, and then boom, he's Ray Liotta. Just the cast is amazing. This is one of the best core casts you're gonna find in a Scorsese film. It's hard to beat The Irishman. That's just not fair, to be honest. And he waited how many decades to put that together?
That was like the triple threat of De Niro, Pesci, and Pacino.
Yeah.
And they just threw Harvey Keitel in there too. It's just like, slip him right in there too.
Bro.
But between Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, Paul Sorvino, and then everybody else, see Samuel L. Jackson for 2 seconds popping up in and out of this. The music's great. There's iconic scenes. The filmmaking's impressive. The whole long take into the Copacabana, just fantastic. And it's hard to argue against this movie being so thoroughly entertaining, but also saying a lot and putting a really big spotlight on toxic relationships, because there's no ways around it. This marriage between Henry and Karen's not a good relationship. It's also great to see Lorraine Bracco between this and Sopranos. This film is just so great. And in hindsight, this is definitely one of those like best picture nominees that you're just like, this didn't win. And here's the thing. I've seen Dances with Wolves, and it's a sprawling big Western from that time. It's not Goodfellas.
Well, like that was still around the time when the go-to best picture winner would be like this huge, like sprawling historical epic type of thing.
Yeah. Out of Africa, Gandhi, the Last Emperor.
But then Silence of the Lambs won a year later, so that kind of broke the mold of it.
Goodfellas walked so Hannibal Lecter could run.
And Everything Everywhere All at Once, if we're talking about mold breakers with Best Picture, right?
Oh, yes.
We're the
Just
weirdest Best Picture winner ever. But I have to do it, even though Matt's not with us. We taking Henry, Jimmy, and Tommy out to Applebee's.
No.
With all the Italian cooking that they're getting, none of them would go to Applebee's.
Somebody's gonna die in Applebee's. Let's just be honest, guys. Someone's going to get whacked in Applebee's, so I don't want to be there when that happens.
They take out the microwaved half-off mozzarella sticks to Tommy DeVito, and he's just like, "What the F is this?"
Or in this case, would you bring him to Olive Garden?
Oh, that's even worse.
I feel like there's going to be a spider there. There's going to be a character like Michael Imperioli that's going to die regardless of wherever we go. They're going to pick on like one random waiter, and then it's going to result in something bad.
Yeah, I do agree. I think taking them to Olive Garden would be worse, because at least them going into Applebee's, it's not an affront to Italian cooking. You take them to Olive Garden, yeah. You can't take any self-respecting Italian person to Olive Garden.
It's like that scene in The Sopranos when what's his name, Paulie Walnuts is at that espresso place, and he's given the Starbucks place, and he's like, they're taking our food, they're monopolizing over us. What the hell is this?
But like, just while we're speaking of Sopranos references, like what's funny is that like there are like a couple things in this movie that have shown up in the Sopranos, like the scene when Spider, Michael Imperioli's character gets shot in the foot. There's a scene in an episode, I think in like the first season of The Sopranos, Michael Imperioli's character goes to a bakery and and the guy gives him a hard time, and then Michael Imperioli ends up shooting him in the foot. And then another thing was like
and he says a line too. He's like, you should something is just like, I know how I've been on the other side or something like that.
He does. I forgot.
Yeah,
I forgot
like
that
a small
bit.
That.
But then also like the scene in Goodfellas when right after they get married and Henry is out late, and then Suzanne Shepard, who plays the mom, she's like, what kind of people are these? They're like, she plays Carmela Soprano's mom, and there's an episode like later in the show where like it's like a quick scene, but it's kind of interesting because like she talks to Carmela about like how, I guess like during a party they had for Tony, like Carmela's family had these quote unquote like cultured Italian friends, whereas Tony's friends were more like like the
bunch
typical,
of animals.
Right, right, and like she has a scene what she has a scene when she tells Carmela, "Oh, Tony's friends like they made all of us look they made us all look like Gavones," and like it was just kind of like an interesting like if not intentional, it was kind of like an interesting callback to that like what kind of
100%.
people are these seen from Goodfellas?
100%.
I think that's an interesting way to kick off talking about some of the specifics about this film. I think one of the interesting things is the different kinds of dynamics, because like obviously there's very specific dynamics when it comes to men and women in this film, and how the men very much feel like they could just do whatever the hell they want. Like Henry's very
Yeah.
obviously just having other women on the side all over the place in this film.
Gumadas. Yeah.
And you know, and that whole I love that scene because it's uncomfortably true of when Karen meets all the other wives
Oh my
Oh,
God.
and they're talking about the hair and the makeup and everything. I'm just like,
And the kids, talking about parenting the kids. Like they're talking about how like they should really raise their kids and the kids are getting in trouble becoming gangsters.
and it's just like this is very accurate. Um,
100%.
it's that kind of thing. And then I think one of the and like obviously we talk more in detail, but also some of the other dynamics of like being full Italian, being actually Italian, and
Oh
being
yeah.
a made man in the mob. And it's so interesting because how often does Robert De Niro play Irishman in Martin Scorsese films? Um, and like Jimmy can't be made because he's not Italian, and
and then
Henry
Henry
can't
can't
be
be made
made.
because he's only half Italian.
He's only
And
half
not in,
Italian.
and not only being made, but Karen's Jewish. That also plays a role into it too.
And exactly with like that kind of dynamic, and the whole dynamic of like her family not approving of like why is she not dating a Jewish man. Um, very, very obviously not Roman Catholic.
But
And like the one last thing I was going to add is the different approaches within this family, because I feel like the film sets up Paul Sorvino's character to be like the standard of morals within the mob.
mhm.
Because like there's obviously a separate set of moral standards for people in the mob than like regular people, because you're still in the mob doing bad things. But like he's even the one, like Vito and the Godfather is like, we don't get into these drugs, they're messy. And you have Henry and Jimmy and Tommy who are renegades and doing all this stuff on the side and getting themselves in trouble.
And getting high while they're at it.
Best part of Ray Liotta's performance, his descent into complete drugginess
Oh my God. Like that
and
whole
paranoia.
montage. That whole montage with his brother's
The
birthday.
coked up montage with the sauce on the stove, and now he's got to go all the way to
Yeah.
Jersey.
I felt like
Love it.
I was on cocaine. I'm just like,
Jimmy Belfour or Hank or Henry Hill. Who has it, who's the more drugged up, crazed one in this
oh,
situation?
come on, Johnny definitely has it. Spending his $20,000 on one dinner. But
One thing that's interesting that I caught on this time around was there's that scene when Henry and his friends go to they go to the club with their gumars, and he has the voiceover saying like he says like weekday nights are like I'm getting it wrong, but I'm probably getting it wrong. But he says like, oh, like weekday nights are for the wives, but like Saturdays were for the girlfriends. And I was thinking like, so like I'm sure a lot of like the other wives who married into this lifestyle knew that, but
Yeah.
since Karen was Jewish, like she did she like was she privy to that at all, like the whole like Gumar thing, or I mean like because like the whole scene when she goes to the apartment and like she starts like saying, you know, I want everyone to know that Janice Rossi is stealing my husband. Like I was thinking, like, did she know the whole thing with the did she like was she privy to the whole Gumar thing, marrying into this lifestyle, but then like she just didn't like it when it happened to her, or was she or not being of an Italian mafia background, did this come as like a total shock to her that yeah, it's normal for mobsters to have women on the side?
I think that's a good point. I would say it's a bit of both. I think she wasn't privy to it and that she's not used to that. But at the same time, you brought up a really good point. I think because she already has a very opinionated personality, she just assumes that it would never really happen to her. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, I mean, I think I would say it's a little bit of both.
I definitely think she didn't get
Okay.
that going into this.
Mhm.
And I think it's and just speaking from like general frameworks of like what we see in terms of like how men act in mob movies in terms of like women and stuff like that, it's pretty established in these kinds of situations that like they're all sleeping around, they're all having other wives, and like the Roman Catholic thing is you're not getting a divorce, you're just dealing with it. And I think that's the thing. It's just like the wives are taken care of, the kids are taken care of, their husbands are going out doing whatever the hell. And unfortunately, I think that is just the norm that a lot of the Italian women in this film probably grew up in.
Hmm.
And so I think that's why it's like Tara never really feels like she's part of that group. And because she's an outsider, she doesn't have that cultural understanding. And I think there's just a lot of things that she just takes for granted that, like, I'm a woman, I'm marrying a man, he's my husband, he's my husband. And that's definitely not how all the men act in this movie for the most part. And, you know, it's very obvious like these people aren't supposed to be people we like, and they do horrible things. They treat women like crap. There is very, very casual racism, just like all
Oh yeah.
over the place in this movie. And because the thing is, it's like growing up in a very Italian family, uh,
Yeah.
Well,
it's like,
but you know,
I
but then you know what, like with that, like I just want to talk about like how Scorsese, like he really does do like a great job, showing like what it's like to be in like to be in like an Italian family, because despite him showing the guys, having affairs on the side, he also shows how much like their actual family does mean to them, because you have the scene with the wedding, you have the scene with the Sunday dinners, the birthday parties, you have like that quick montage of like the still photos of them, like at everyone's houses and going on vacation, just like the way those pictures, like the way people are positioned in those photos. I mean, like they really do, like like they don't look staged for like the movie. Like they actually do
Yeah.
look like legit photographs that you would see in like someone's photo album, in someone's photo album. Like they just look so, like so incredibly real. It's not like, it doesn't feel like you're watching actors in like show up in these still photographs. Like they actually look like, like they look like the real deal.
Yeah, and I think even the narration speaks to that too, to Scorsese's style, and that he everybody really goes back to it when it comes to his filmography. It always goes back to that short film he did, with that was first short film, Italian American,
Yep,
between his parents, and talking about, because
that's a
everything you want
that's a great
always
documentary.
100%. And the still shots is like one of my favorite techniques, but for me, it's always that narration. And he got that idea, the narration, from the French filmmakers about how the French New Age of having a voiceover on top. But he's like, instead of just like having the French guy like John Cousteau took over it. He wanted to have, the paisan on the street talking about what's going on and what's happening and the who nots and who to mess with. And it brings it such a personal, may not be real, but you would believe it. I believe I know these people. Like this way you said it, Shane, like we know these Italians because we see them on screen and that's exactly how these guys act.
And actually, speaking of personal, can we just talk about him putting his mom in the movie and just how great she is?
And the dad too, on the phone that called his dad. He was the one who called De Niro. That was his dad. He's like, yeah, that's just the way it is. He's gone.
I didn't know that was him. I didn't know that was him doing the voice on the phone.
Me neither. Found out
like his mom in this movie is like
oh yeah,
he's just in it for like 3 scenes and she's fantastic.
That was the most genuine, like Italian grandma you could possibly find.
You like my paintings? show me your paintings, Ma.
And like when they go to her house, like in the middle of the night, she says, "Oh, you guys, sit down. I'll make you something." And then it cuts to like this table that's just full of food.
Hey, Ma, can I borrow this knife?
Yeah, sure, but bring it back.
But Jim and Kevin, what were some of the things that stood out to you in the film, specifically about some of the dynamics that they focused on?
I really liked how they focused on the casual violence that they dealt out in that movie. Casually shooting the bartender when they're playing
Spider,
pool.
yeah.
Right.
Tommy's a dangerous person and terrifying. And Joe Pesci earned that.
Mm-hmm.
I spent the whole movie waiting for him to die.
Yes. And so try to think back to everybody's first time watching this, which, Kevin, this was your first time watching this. How shocked were you all when he walked in that room? It was empty and they just straight shoot him in the back of the head.
I saw it coming.
The first time I saw it, I was well. I mean, I know in the beginning when he kills that guy, they say, oh, if you kill a made man without getting approval, then that's like a death sentence for you. But at the same time, I was thinking, this guy is such a wild card. He lives by his own rules. They're not gonna kill him, but then they do.
Seeing that room blank and they use it again in The Irishman too is the part that always gets to me. It's such a great way of indicating that this is doom. Like, you are fucked when you see a blank room and nobody's there, and then pop, you're dead.
Actually, here's just like a quick interesting fact is that speaking of him winning Best Supporting Actor, all 3 of his Oscar nominations were for Best Supporting Actor, and all three of them were for Scorsese films.
Was it Casino he was nominated for?
No, he was nominated for
Raging Bull.
First Raging Bull, and then he won for Goodfellas, and then he was nominated a few years ago for The Irishman, which he should have won that year.
Who did win?
Brad Pitt was too cool.
No, don't get me wrong. Brad Pitt, he was good in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but my personal favorite was Joe Pesci that year.
It was a pretty good year that year, though. There were a lot of good nominees.
Tough year.
Yeah,
it was tough.
Willem Dafoe wasn't even nominated for The Lighthouse, which was some BS.
Yeah.
But they even had to beat Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers. But how about you, Jim? What were some of the things that stood out to you?
2 things. One, it's 3 things. Sorry, I'll stop it at 3. We'll cap it at 3. When that character in question walks into the empty room and gets whacked at the end of the movie, first time I watched it, I was young enough that I didn't see it coming. I thought he'd actually been made, and I was like, how can they, was really confused by it. This time, there's only one way this ends for Tommy. I mean, for Joe Pesci's character. That's the only way. It has to happen. 2, that character Tommy, his name's Tommy, right?
Yep.
Reminded me of the Robert De Niro character in Mean Streets, whose name was Jimmy, I think. Doesn't matter. Somebody fact check me.
I will.
But Mean Streets, he's the loose cannon. Robert De Niro is the loose cannon. He is kind of like the role is split in Goodfellas between Jimmy and Tommy, Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, in other words. But in Mean Streets, there's just one character who's fucking everything up, and you know if he doesn't straighten out and fly right, like something bad is going to happen, and it does. So like to me, I thought about Mean Streets a lot watching this again.
Johnny Boy.
Johnny Boy. How could I forget Johnny Boy? Classic. Because to me, I think he recognized a lot of things that he did well in Mean Streets, and this was like another chance to do the ideas over or do scenes over with a little more polish, with a little more story, with a bigger ensemble cast. So that was cool. Lastly, I like that Vinnie brought up the other monologue. I'd forgotten that Karen also monologues in this movie. So yeah, I do agree that there's probably some culture clash there. She didn't really know what she was getting into, but even after she gets comfortable in that role of seeing the same people on vacation at parties every weekend, when he goes away, all those people just disappear from her life. And like that would be I'd freak out too, man. I'd be pissed off if like maybe you'd know to expect that if you were like a true mob wife, but like that's pretty rough. She had 2 or 3 kids to take care of, and then Paulie and everybody else just kind of they're gone. Everybody's lying low. So like yeah, I've been thinking in the past 5 minutes more about Karen's character and how she really plays a big role in how Henry's trajectory ends in the movie. He may not have wound up there if not for Karen being who she was.
And like what's interesting about her is how just given how she wasn't of Italian background and she really didn't know much about this lifestyle going into it. Like it was interesting how at the end, how like when Jimmy tries to set it up to like have her whacked, how like she actually catches on that like that something is off, and then she just hightails it out of there, like you know, like for someone who for someone who like for someone who like was new to this lifestyle, then comfortable with it, then feeling at disadvantage when they all kind of like abandon her, and then and then at the end like showing the smarts to know oh, I'm about to be whacked, I gotta get out of here. Like that was like an interesting like angle to her character, I thought.
So speaking about that scene, since I only saw it just this one time, that's one thing I was thinking about after I saw it. I wasn't sure if she was just going by instinct because of the weird situation she was in. She went down the block and it was all sketchy. It was all dark. All those guys were there in the dark waiting for her. I couldn't tell, at least just having just seen it once, if that was the intention from Jimmy, or if she just walked into a bad situation and he didn't know. I don't know. I couldn't tell if that was set up or not.
Yeah, well, you're right. I guess it could go either way, but like
it does speak to her instincts,
right? And I mean, like at that point, they're really like trying to like tie up the loose ends of people people that are probably gonna talk and rat people out, so they want to like kill them off. So at that point, I mean, I understand if someone thinks, oh, like maybe like she wasn't getting whacked and it was just like a sketchy situation she happened to fall into. But at that point, like I assumed that she was going to be like the next in line to get whacked because everyone else beforehand was showing up dead.
I guess I definitely got the impression that Jimmy didn't have Henry's back or anything at that point. I guess I just wasn't sure how far he had gone.
Well, I think Scorsese does such a great job of putting that doubt into your head, because it's great scene. And that everybody talks about how scary Tommy is because he's like a bulldog and he's coming at you like bark, 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 bark.
Jimmy's the slimiest.
Jimmy
Yeah.
is the most dangerous person in this movie because
He's smart.
I love the Layla montage with just the slide guitar part of Layla playing in the background, just all of these guys winding up dead
Yep.
because they were dumb.
Mhm.
They were stupid, they were reckless, and that's what Jimmy's going to do to you if you get in the way of him getting in trouble. And that's the scary thing because, and I think this is a bigger thing with the whole film, I think why I appreciate this more is because of Karen.
Right.
Henry is very irredeemable. Like from the start, he wants to be a gangster. He wants this life. He wants to do this. She's coming into this, and yes, for a good chunk of this film, and she even admits it. Very human of her to admit, like, she was enjoying it. She was enjoying the nice things and everything like that. But she's coming into this not used to the horrible things that they would just do to each other. And like Henry's like, Karen, I'm in here. They need to lie low. They need to cut me off. And in Henry's mind, he has been convinced of that his whole life. That's
Right.
part of the deal. And that's really shitty. But Karen, coming from the outside looking in, realizing it's like, you're being abused in this situation. And I think that's why she's able to see through that. Is because they're all so programmed to trust each other.
It's kind of cult-like.
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
Tommy just trusted these two guys picking him up, taking him wherever, which if you take a step back and think about it, that's a perfect time to kill you.
Well, it's also the scene. It's also the scene when what's his name? Oh, when Maury gets killed. He just thinks he's going. He's just going for a drive with Tommy, Jimmy,
Yep.
and the other guy. Then he gets killed right
Well,
away.
And I love that scene, Kevin, because it does make you doubt it. But I think after so much time, and the more time you watch this movie and realize who Jimmy really is, there's no way he wasn't trying to have her killed. And I just I know I made the face earlier, but that long shot down there, he's like,
yep.
Yeah, it's fine, just go. And just Robert De Niro being like, oh, come on.
That's the De Niro thing. That's just what he normally does. You know?
And it's just there's something like the big glass, there's just something about that shot of him with the big glasses and the suit on, looking all like, come on.
Yeah, I will say
like an attorney.
that scene cemented my my opinion that I didn't care what happened to him by the end of the movie. When he got ratted on, I didn't really care. I thought he kind of had that coming.
I think Jimmy was so centered on himself, and I think that's what puts him at odds
Right.
with the family in general, is that and this is where it's Paulie being set up as the moral high ground of the mob, is there's a code here, there's a family here. Jimmy doesn't give a shit about the family.
Right. He's kind of rolling with the punches to see where he can float to the top.
And it kind of goes to what we're saying too about him being, an outsider too, because he's also an outsider when you really think about it.
He's an Irishman. He's not Italian. He did not grow up in this situation. And because it's so fascinating that this was, so besides Mean Streets, having to go all the way back to the early 70s when he wasn't a big star, this is De Niro's first time being supporting in a Scorsese movie in almost 2 decades.
That's true.
Because he's always been the leading man. It's so interesting seeing him as the supporting character in this movie because, Ray Liotta is the lead of this film. And not to sell Lorraine Bracco short either, they're the leads of this movie.
Yeah.
But you have somebody like Robert De Niro there, and you get to see him do his stuff, like him freaking out about the fur coat and the pink Cadillac.
Well, get
And
pinched.
when he gets off that phone and he starts beating it,
Oh yeah.
that's just like De Niro going full blown like rage. And just, a couple years later, him being Max Cady, just this setting it all up. With that just rageful, explosive antagonist in this movie. Because I really do feel like when you take a step back and really think about it, Jimmy and Tommy are antagonistic forces in this movie
Yeah.
that are surrounding Henry's journey. And they're really bad influences. And here's the thing. I feel like Henry's kind of stunted in his own development
Yes.
because he's been in this since he was a kid. And he's been born and he was bred into this lifestyle. And he's just looking at the cool guys like Tommy and Jimmy and who took him under his wing. And they're horrible people. Even for like mob standards, they're horrible.
It's like he still fantasize. It's like the idea of being a gangster is a fantasy, even to the point where he's in witness protection. He's still enamored by his fantasy. It just stunted
And
is the
they
best
give
word to
me-
put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I order spaghetti and meat sauce and they give me egg noodles and ketchup.
And I'll at Applebee's, by the way.
He should know better not to order something Italian at Applebee's. Let's be
There you go.
honest. Can you guys see their roles reversed if Henry Hill was played by Robert De Niro? Can you picture that?
I think he would have been too old by that point.
Well, that doesn't matter. Scorsese movies. Let's make that clear.
You can age people backwards, apparently, but if we're talking Irishman,
They could have just dyed his hair, honestly. Well, that's what
It reminds-
Wait a minute, that's exactly what they did with Joe Pesci. Like Tommy and Henry are supposed to be the same age, and Joe Pesci's Robert De Niro's age.
Yep.
Like, it's so weird. Like, look, it's teenage Ray Liotta, who like probably is like 20 something, and like, look, it's teenage Tommy, and it's Joe Pesci, who's like 40.
Maybe it's because Joe Pesci has like a permanent age. Like you can always imagine him any age, to be honest with you. Like
Right.
even in The Irishman, he was the one along with Pacino where the de-aging worked the best.
But then,
Because they're oldest.
Right. Right.
But then in the first scene with Jimmy and Henry is narrating it, like doesn't he mention Jimmy being 28?
Yeah.
No, and then also there's a scene when like Ray Liotta when he's like first starting to date Karen, and there's a scene when the two of them are lying on the hood of his car, and it's her narrating, and she mentions at that time that Henry was 21.
Which
Right.
like
I remember that.
Ray
The age stuff
Liotta
is weird.
Ray Liotta is a much more believable 21 years old than
The
Joe
Robert De
Pesci
Niro
is
is as
21 years
28.
old.
And no, like I'm not like knocking their ages or anything. Like I'm just saying how funny it was. How funny it was
Well,
that
and it's
that you,
it's funny to laugh at and having this conversation, but like I don't give a shit watching the movie.
right, of
I don't
course.
even think about it twice.
Right.
And that's because if the acting and the casting's great,
Yes,
and
yeah,
it's
for sure.
not distracting, like having an 80-year-old try to like curb stomp a guy and look like an 80-year-old. Thank you, The Irishman. But like I just, in general, I think this has a great cast. I think it really uses its cast really well. There's so many, like, if you were an Italian actor, you're probably in this movie at some point. And I just think that, like, this movie's so thoroughly, like, it's so bad to say entertaining because, like, how harsh and terrible so many things are. But like Scorsese knows how to make things with high energy and great pacing. And like look at Wolf of Wall Street. That movie's 3 hours.
That flew
Oh my
by.
gosh.
The Irishman does feel like 3 hours.
Well, you know what?
It has a different tone though.
Yeah. You know what? Well, yeah, like with The Irishman, like even though that was 3.5 hours, and you felt the length more than you did in like The Wolf of Wall Street, like you were still you were still engaged. You were still engaged with it.
Yes.
Like, and you know what? Like, and like if I'm engaged with a movie, I don't care if I feel its length from time to time.
Well,
I would
like,
agree.
yeah, because how I kind of see it is like, and this is an interesting kind of microcosm of Scorsese's career, is like to compare these to westerns, because westerns and gangster films are very specific genres of films, and like Goodfellas and like this era Scorsese's like prime Sergio Leone, early Clint Eastwood, outlaw Josie Whale, like this is like thoroughly entertaining, high energy kinds of things. The Irishman's like the Unforgiven of gangster movies.
Oh yeah.
Like it's going to deconstruct gangster movies, and it's not supposed to feel like that the like prime kinds of things, because like the last third of The Irishman is a sobering deconstruction of what gangster movies are.
It reminded me of the second half of the Raging Bull, where it's about demise, and to me that's why it's like the perfect. To me, I consider this the end of a trilogy where Mean Streets is the start, Goodfellas is the middle, The Irishman is the end, where they're all similar movies with similar themes, but it cultivates into one final sobering, this is the end.
Because we see Henry still in his prime when he starts his witness protection program. We don't see him growing old and alone and no family because he just burned every single bridge that he has, because of course he did, because that's how gangsters' lives go.
Yeah.
If you don't die young being a gangster, you're going to die very old and alone and decrepit in a nursing home, just like Sheeran does in The Irishman.
And in Mean Streets too, he dies young. The main character, Harvey Keitel, dies young.
It's the kind of thing where it's just like this is that whole fantasy part of it. And the movie ends with the fantasy being over. But we don't see the aftermath, which that's not what this story is supposed to be.
The aftermath is My Blue Heaven with Steve Martin.
Never seen that.
But
I might have seen that. It sounds familiar.
But it is based on Henry Hill's life in witness protection.
Is it really?
Yes, it is.
Interesting.
It's actually it is probably the goofier end version of him in witness protection. Yeah.
I'll have to check
That's
that
our
out.
homework. We all have to watch that movie now.
Now, does anybody have any like other main things that they want to talk about the film? Some standout scenes, performances, things that we haven't touched upon?
I did want to touch back on Karen again.
Mm-hmm.
I really like how by the end of the movie, one of you mentioned that it's like a cult dynamic being in the mob.
And that's what I was going to bring up as my final point too. But
you
go,
really feel that with her. By the end of the movie, she's hiding drugs for him before his house gets raided, and doing all this crazy shit for them, for the mob, really. And she's kind of standing by him through everything. He goes to prison and everything, and I don't know. I got the sensation that she was like in Stockholm syndrome or something by the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I enjoyed seeing her little journey. And having the narration from her helped cement that.
No, it's an amazing performance from Lorraine Bracco, especially when you think of like the low, subdued, Dr. Melfi in The Sopranos. It's seeing her with such range and seeing how she's thinking, and you're right. You definitely get that sense that she's just trapped.
Trapped, right?
Yeah.
Well, and you also like really feel that sense of loss with her when they're meeting with the FBI agent and he tells them, oh, to save your lives, we're gonna put you in witness protection. And she says, oh, well, what about my parents? Like, God forbid they get sick. Like, am I not allowed to see them? And like, do I not have contact with any of my loved ones? And yeah, you really feel that sense of hesitancy and sadness with her, like, do I really want to do this? Like, do I really have to give like everything up in order to stay alive? And yeah, I mean, it's tragic.
There's also the line when she's talking to the witness protection guy, and she's asking if she has to go, and he's like, "Well, if it makes the witness happier."
But then Henry eventually, but then he
He
tells her,
does.
he tells her, like, if you stay behind, you might be safe for a little while, but then they're eventually gonna come for you in order to get to me.
Right.
What a scumbag.
Whole movie is the ramifications of my own actions.
Scumfellas.
Scumfellas. I got
And
one more thing to say. Joe,
Yeah.
you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, two things actually. One, it blows my mind in Animaniacs that you have the pigeons play Tommy and Jimmy and Henry as like main characters that are just like cute cartoon characters in Animaniacs to Goodfellas, if you ever
Oh my
revisit
God.
it. No, and it's like you really think about this movie, it's
I
like, wow,
gotta
that's
YouTube that.
yes, 100%. Wonderful characters. But the second thing really goes to what you were talking about, Kevin, which is the cultist nature of the mafia. And like the more mafia movies you're watching, more documentaries just about the origins of the mafia, starting from the boot, where like the whole idea of being in the inside and marrying from within and having like a name that's associated that you could trace back to, the first Italians and on the boot does have like this cult-like nature, like whether you're in or out, having tears. And it really made me remind me, and racism playing a role into that as well too, where it's like no outsiders, no this or that. You only have to be this just because. Like that's just because we don't trust. That's just the nature of it. Just trust the system. And it reminds me of like how Slytherin is designed. Or I'm like, if there's ever a house for the mafia, it is going to
Oh
be
my
Slytherin. Like you see Voldemort being a Don, like essentially, and if you're a half-blood, you're better off dead essentially. Like
No,
we
no,
only
like,
want we only want this.
Now I'm picturing the Sorting Hat Buffer crime families
Oh, you want to be a Gryffindor, huh?
put the hat on. Gambino crime family.
Oh yeah,
Now there's an idea.
you think you're strong enough to be a Genovese? Go fuck yourself. I'm putting you into the Colombo family.
Is it a fedora?
It's gonna be like a nice fedora.
Yes,
He's gonna be
yes.
smoking Marlboros.
Oh my god.
What's the matter? I'm taking my smoke break here. Ask me in 15 minutes.
So this is what Warner Brothers Discovery is going to do with this new Harry Potter series, right?
Please get Scorsese. I know Pete Davidson's not Italian, but he's got Bupkis coming up or something. Maybe get who's that new? Get somebody new, like fresh
They're
talent.
not building young Italian talent because they just de-age the old ones.
They just de-age the old.
Well, hey, you know what? If they're still around, you might as well use them while you can.
Michael
Robert-
Imperioli. He's still old, but he's not that old.
Robert De Niro Dumbledore.
I pray to Italian Jesus to make that happen. I'll put garlic in my socks to make that happen.
Jim, what was your point going to be before we went off on that one?
Oh, we should just stop there. I was just going to say that I watched Italian American today for the first time. And
That was good, right?
I just I never realized the way in Scorsese dialogue how they'll talk around the point without, like, when they don't actually communicate, they don't get what the other person's saying. They'll just repeat themselves or they'll say something slightly different. Like it reminded me of the stare off between Joe Pesci and Ray Liotta, where he's like, do I amuse you? You think how am I funny? And he's like, what? He just keeps saying the same thing over and over again. What? and
What?
the
You're
scene just
funny.
goes
You're a funny
on.
guy.
You're
You're a
funny.
funny guy. It's
I almost had
pride.
him. I almost had him.
I
But
think I
I
think it's
never
pride.
realized
Yeah.
how kind of actually that's very realistic. I
Yeah.
thought that was more Scorsese than just organic Italian American
Well, so I want
discussion.
to share something a little bit, and this will be the last thing that I'll say is it's very interesting because like growing up, my mom called me the Irish boy in the family because like in general, I'm more Irish than I am Italian, but dominant genes. And I look very obviously Italian and not Irish, except for the fact that I'm 6'1". But the thing is, it's like I was always a meat and potatoes kid. I hate tomatoes. And like I used to just eat exclusively white pizza and stuff like that. And my mom would joke about that. And like my brother wanted to change his name to Anthony. He has a Bella Italia tattoo on his forearm. And it's just all those kind of things.
Tony. Oh, he's Italian. He's named Tony. Can't they come up
Tony,
with a different name?
Michael, Joseph, biblical names. It's funny because Ethan is a biblical name, just Jewish. But like I don't know. I never was like, oh, I'm super Italian, except I used to be tanner when I was a kid before I had precancerous moles removed and couldn't go out in the sun anymore. Now I'm a vampire. But I watched The Godfather when I was 10 years old because my grandpa made me because it was my culture. And you know, there's a restaurant in Collingswood, New Jersey, which is the neighboring town to my hometown of Han Township. Kevin knows. And there's
I
kitchen.
used to live there.
Yes, there's kitchen consigliere. You walk in. There's The Sopranos on the wall. There's The Godfather on the wall. There's Goodfellas on the wall. They're playing
Oh.
Frank.
And they use the Godfather font as their
Yes.
font.
Exactly. There's Frank playing at any given moment. Being an Italian American is a very specific thing. And it took me sitting and doing my whole entire retrospective of Scorsese's career to help me finally realize that I felt seen.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many, and like growing up Roman Catholic, I had my first Holy Communion. I am confirmed Roman Catholic. I am Shane Charles Francis Canto, Saint Francis. Watching his films and realizing how deeply rooted that Catholicism is, even if it's not outwardly about being Roman Catholic, and outside of like Last Temptation of Christ and Silence and stuff like that, every single one of these films, there's that Catholic guilt there. There's that like deep, like Mean Streets, 100%, like has all of that going on in it. And I didn't realize, for me personally, how important representation is in film until you really watch these films and realize like how understood these films are and how genuine they are. Like being able to watch that, watching Italian American really opened my eyes. I'm like, that's my family. And like seeing those kinds of things in action is important. And I have a whole new respect and perspective on that. Because growing up, what were Italians in media? Gangsters and Jersey effing Shore.
Oh God. Yeah.
Who weren't all Italian, and most of them were from New York. So they could go
specifically Staten Island too. But the funniest thing about that is Mike the Situation, who's straight up Staten Island. Still, he's in Matawan right now and lives in Matawan, and like he still makes it all about him being from Matawan, which is such BS.
It's just the kind
Jersey
of thing
Shore.
where it's just like Scorsese, of like really appreciating Scorsese's work and getting to your point, Jim, is like, this is genuine.
Yeah.
Like if you strip back all the gangster stuff, there's just so much being an Italian American in this movie that like The Godfather wouldn't be The Godfather without Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo and so much of the cast. Goodfellas would not be Goodfellas if it weren't for Martin Scorsese. And, you know, I think that's why it's important to be able to have that authenticity coming from somebody who really understands the culture.
Yeah.
Because
It's interesting.
it makes it that much more real.
It's interesting you mentioned representation, why Scorsese and Spike Lee get along so well and why they are really good friends, because representation, they get along for those same reasons, different cultures, but they portray a side to their cultures that are straight up personal to them. And it makes sense why they get along so well, because their styles, although different, speak from relatability and understanding who they are. So it's kind of interesting. We talk about your point on representation and why it's so important in film.
Any other
I think
thoughts?
I think that's a great place to end.
Bada boom!
Hey, it's what are we thinking on Goodfellas? We like it. Now get the fuck out of here.
Goodfellas, it wasn't just good, it was great. What are you talking about?
Why do they call it Goodfellas? They should just call it Great Fellas. This ain't fellas. This is great. This is Goodfellas.
Why not just call it fellas? You know, like, hey, fellas.
So this video wasn't going to be marked okay for children in the first place, but it definitely isn't now. So you're welcome, YouTube. That's why I label my videos properly. But from Vinnie, from Joe, from Jim, from Kevin, and myself, thank you as always for tuning in and supporting the Development Hell podcast.
Arrivederci.